pretty critical, and it's not just oil price, it's oil production as well. Obviously, when you get disruption to oil production on a significant scale in the Delta, that has a huge impact on government finances. And I think what's really important to remember there is when you look at the revenues that government accrues, even in a low oil price environment, the revenues that government accrues from oil production completely dwarfs anything from foreign direct investment. And that is why, when the oil price goes down, the Naira slumps, but the whole economy grinds to a halt, because the oil price is the thing that creates liquidity in the economy. And so really that is the most critical external factor that we tend to look at. Yes, there has been a fair amount of kind of capital flight from the Nigerian capital markets, but that is, again, tied to the oil price. It's very, very central there. I think beyond the oil price, and to come back to this point of production, and you raised the point of lower investment in Nigeria's oil and gas sector, well, part of that is to do with security, but the biggest piece is this oil and gas legislative reform process, which has been in the offing for over a decade now. And it's been, I would say, one of the biggest failures of the Buhari administration, because when he came into office and he put Emmanuel Kachikwu into the ministerial post as Minister of Petroleum, but also as MD of the NNPC, there was real momentum around that process of how do we create a more stable and forward-looking framework for oil and gas investments, which is, frankly, when you look at the international oil companies, what is going to make them invest? It's stability in the fiscal terms. It's a very complex process. When you looked at it's called the Petroleum Industry Bill, and it packages together about 16 different pieces of legislation. They've recognized that trying to pass that all in one go is too complex and too likely to face resistance from both vested interests but also geopolitical interests internally in Nigeria. So they've unbundled it into the different parts around governments, around fiscal terms, and sort of some of the administrative elements as well. That's a very positive step. But ultimately, Kachikwu was then curtailed in his role. So he was removed from his position in the NNPC, and that created a kind of a institutional struggle around that process. And equally, it was a bill that was advanced by Saraki, who was the Senate president, who was in a tussle with the president at the time, between the executive and the legislative and arms of government. And all of these kind of dynamics essentially saw the government entangle itself around this reform process and negligible progress being made. I think, when you look at Nigeria and its long-term interests, yes, diversification is absolutely key, but getting those oil sector reforms passed so that Nigeria can create a more competitive and more stable framework for future investment in oil and gas is key. And yes, on land, the process is towards indigenization, to local companies that can develop and invest in those local assets. That's key because, frankly, the international oil companies want that so that they can free up capital to invest in the more high-technology, deep offshore prospects, which for them are much more attractive under the PSC terms. Yeah. So that's really, oil and gas sector reform, is absolutely fundamental.